Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Robert Fry. Quick plug here. Longtime friend and at times our part-time co-host, Garrett Baker, will be speaking at the Sport Movement Skill Conference here in Minnesota in the Twin Cities this October 6th through the 7th. And so if you guys would love to come to that, it's a hybrid event. So a portion of it will be virtual and another portion will be in person. Highly recommend coming to the in-person. There's always something different about being in person with other people as a way to learn and grow in these ideas on how do we develop players and athletes through an ecological lens. And so I highly recommend you guys check that out. There'll be a link in the description for the Sport Movement Skill Conference for 2023.
And today we have on longtime member and friend of the podcast, Chad Longworth. Excited to have him on again as we talk a lot about failures and learning outcomes. And we talk a little bit about the school system, how it's kind of treating us to think a different way, if you will. And we talk about how some athletes may not be the athletes who they are today without those failures and learning outcomes, or some of those athletes who never were hyped up. Well, some examples include Michael Jordan, Stephen Curry, Giannis Antetokounmpo, among others.
And so, to me, your ability to take failure and use it as fuel to ignite your growth, I think, is super powerful. And we all love those stories of kind of the underdog, where a guy who is overlooked, or maybe wasn't as talented, all of a sudden becoming very talented, because that to me is like the everyman story in some ways. And so today we have on Chad to talk about his article, Growing Through Failure. And I think this topic is very timely because I see this being one of the biggest struggles for a lot of players, because our society so much shows us success all the time. I mean, one of the things that I remember my head coach telling me in college was everybody sees the glory, but not everybody knows the story. And because so oftentimes everybody sees how successful a person is, they just think it's so easy and it just comes naturally all the time. And that, we should have success at a high rate. And when we encounter struggle or failure, because of all the modern comforts of society, it's just easier to go to something comfortable, to not confront these struggles. And then you see a lot of talented players end up leaving the game. And I think that is not only something that is unfortunate in our game, but I think just unfortunate in general. And so today's topic, I think, is super timely, where we try to address this idea and concept of failure, and how do we help players embrace the failure, embrace the struggle, so that they can become the best versions of themselves. And so I hope you guys enjoy today's episode with Chad Longworth.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
So I don't know when this will get released, because this to the failing forward part and embracing the struggle, because I think that to me is the thing that has gotten me thinking, kind of the term that I want to kind of couch this in is embracing the struggle, because I think that's a lot of what we struggle, or what trips a lot of people up today, and players in their pursuit of the game. And so maybe a good place to start, before I just go on a long rant and monologue, is, Chad, what was the impetus for you writing that article about, trying to remember the actual title, but it's basically like, growing through losing.
Yes, correct. My kids are currently in the youth sports world. I think the foundation for what you're talking about as far as conditioning players to see losing, failure, quote figures, failure. These are like small missteps as opportunities. It's conditioned into them really from the beginning to avoid these things. School, I would put this squarely on the back of school. Steve Johnson's probably a better guy to circle into this conversation about school. I've tried to get Steve on my podcast a lot just to rant about school. And I think school provides a lot of good opportunities for young people to develop a lot of great skills. But one of the things that it falls really short on is allowing for fail and grow opportunities, because failure is seen as bad. Don't fail, run from it. My kids just took their standardized testing, and it's all about passing, and you got to make this score, and the teachers are evaluated on the quality of their teaching by how many kids pass the standardized test. And so from the beginning, how do we better condition young people? Because a lot of the perspectives, but a lot of the principles that you build your life upon are developed in those formative young years. And I think sports fills the gap for youth. Sports fills the gap for the opportunity for failing and learning. But even in that today, we're running from that still in youth sports. And so I guess a lot of the stuff that I've been writing lately is just messages to deliver to my kids, really. Like this is, all these things are okay, and all these things that we do in practice where even in practice we're presenting you opportunities with struggle are just growth opportunities. They're just going to make you what they understand now is just, what we could talk about in this podcast is what players understand right now. They understand their performance on the field. They understand their performance in the basketball arena or on the football or whatever. And so how you can relate that skill of fail and grow, lose and move forward, I think it fills a gap nicely where school doesn't. Because back to the beginning, school is where this whole idea takes root of avoid failure at all costs.
Well, and that's, I completely agree with you. I mean, because that was the thing that I felt like was maybe missing from your article or your blog post. Because you didn't bring that up, I don't think, in there.
I think I wrote one. I'd have to look back in the last 6 to 8 weeks about school, but
that's fair.
Maybe it was a Facebook post. I can't remember. I've been trying to put long form on Facebook to try to generate some conversation there in long form. So may have been just that.
Because I definitely feel like, even for me, when I was in school, elementary school, or just growing up, like, grades were heavily emphasized. And it wasn't until my sophomore year in high school where one of my teachers told me, hey, like, it's not about, like, school isn't about grades. It's about learning. And not that I, like, in my mind consciously was thinking that school was all about grades, but it just helped me remind me of what the purpose of being there was. And I lost that purpose probably since I was in first grade. Because in first grade, I started to kind of like school. I was like, oh, I'm kind of learning stuff or whatever. And then some kid in class was like, I hate school. And then it was like, oh, I guess maybe it's not okay to like school. And so I was like, oh, then I started, like, hating school too. And it's tied back to the emphasis being on the grades, and the grades are reward you, the system, right? This is where, to your point of having Steve Johnson on, would be really good, because we just talk about economics and incentives. The incentive structure within the school system is to get it right the first time. And what's interesting is that if you notice, even at like the college level, the expectation from the college coaches oftentimes is get it right the first time. And so you have this pressure system that really in some ways is designed for those who have adapted to that, but also it rewards those who take less risks and do what the coach says. And so there's, from my experience with the school system, because I feel like it's a little bit easier to criticize the school system here instead of doing the other thing. But this applies to baseball as well, is that in school, oftentimes your upper bound potential is capped in the school system. So you do grow, you do get better, but you lose the really, I want to say, exponential upside. Like you may get like a 2 or 3x return when you could have gotten a 10x return. And
have you read?
I feel like that's that
dog.
I have not. Tell me a little bit more about it.
It's the story of Nike, and it's just Phil Knight's story of Nike. When you're talking about this, I just had this idea, and I've had this idea before. It's not just now, but like we see the people like Phil Knight, we see the people like Steve Jobs, we see the people that do these enormous things as their disruptors. You know, they're seen as they're probably in school seen as problems because they don't, and that's I mean, I'm not anywhere near that level, but my path as what's become popular as solo entrepreneur is a different path, and it's disruptive. And you know, you see people like Jobs and you see people like Phil Knight who kind of bucked the system in school, in whatever. Shoe Dog's the story of Nike, where Nike came. When I read it in like 3 days. It's fantastic. It was kind of this light bulb moment where Nike runs right up to the point of almost going out of business. Like Nike, like we're right on the doorstep of like, if I walk through this door, there's no Nike. You know, they had supply chain problems early on, and you know, supplier problems and yada yada yada. And I mean, Nike runs right up to the door of failing. And you know, he solves the problem, solves the issue, works around the you know, what we have. And Nike is today. It was this light bulb moment in my own business journey of like, if Nike has come this close to failing, I should probably relax a little and not think that my business journey is so different than everyone else's. But yeah, Shoe Dog is awesome. Shoe Dog is a good story of failing and roadblocks and hurdles and all these things, obstacles of progress that you just jump over. And if you just continue to jump over these things and solve these problems, you end up at a place. I wouldn't say better is probably the wrong word. You end up at a place of progress, much progress from where you started. That's as a hitter. You know, the thing we can relate this to hitting, you know, the more hurdles that you jump over, the more problems that you present to yourself that are not within the game. Because the game is like, it's the whole deal. You end up at a place of progress. You know, I am getting to the end of spring season where our high school hitters who spent hours solving the problems that I put in front of them, you know, in the off season, much at the chagrin of, not that I pay any attention to anybody, and we keep who trains with us very secretive so they don't get ridiculed publicly and through their coaches and all this other stuff. But we're coming to the end of very successful seasons for them. Successful runs. Runs is the whole point. And the more problems that they solve to produce runs, the better, more valuable they are to their team. I did an NIL conversation with a girl that I trained in high school for one of her classes, and she's in college now. And the message was, "What do you think about the NIL?" And I said, your central role as an athlete in college is to provide value for yourself, build value for yourself, build value for your team through your performance. The more you do that, the rewards of the NIL come. But if you focus on the NIL, then you lose sight of becoming a valuable player for yourself and a valuable player for your team. And all that becomes it.
Just in case, I think I'm following NIL, National Letter of Intent. Is that what you're talking about?
No, NIL is the
See, that's why I want
to name
See,
it. Profitability for college athletes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, Robert, I do that thing with the ABCA or whatever it's called.
Right. NLI is National Letter of Intent. They're very much the same, while very much being different.
Okay. Now I'm tracking.
But to tie it to the point of failing and losing and moving forward, it's like you become a valuable player through taking risks, and taking risk becomes the higher chance of failing, which people run from. We would rather, from a skill acquisition and practice design perspective, we would rather design safe success environments that make us feel good, which is life in general too. We would rather do teamwork in life and feel accomplished than like take the risk of doing harder things at the risk of failing, but failing is required for progress and value for yourself.
I mean, this is where we get into like the stuff that I've been kind of growing in, because the whole thing of like understanding that this is for your benefit, like, and this is how, or even too of, well, you touched on what I think has been something that I didn't grasp right away, and it's only through like my current experience with religious faith of understanding that comfort is a huge enemy to growth, and it makes you to switch it over to like more secular thought, it makes you soft, and like just like all the, and that struggle is good. So I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and I was kind of talking about how like, making things always more faster, efficient, easier isn't always good. Like struggle is good. Having to do some things that actually take a longer time and not the most efficient route there is actually a good thing. And it just made me think about like me getting a new computer to edit video faster. I was like, oh, maybe I'm shortcutting myself here by trying to make everything easier about my process. And maybe it's better that it's actually harder and it takes a little bit longer and it's slower. And that was a big mind shift for me, like, or a challenge to me. But it's something that I'm understanding even just in terms of myself of, and why can't I do more? It's because I'm so used to comfort. And I think this is true with a lot of our players. Everything in our life is designed to make us more comfortable, everything to be more efficient, to happen more instantaneously. And so then when we encounter struggle or things don't happen instantaneously, and with ease that the rest of our life, it, happens with, then we want to shy away from it, or we don't want to do it. We lose interest. We give up. I think that's the biggest thing is with my players, the thing that I think kills me the most or makes the situation hard to watch is seeing them give up, right? Like everything else in life is just, it's not a guarantee. But when you give up, you're guaranteed to fail or to essentially. And that's where I think the big thing is when one of the thing that I put in my notes of you had a list of a few tips to get started. The one that I would add, I thought your list was really good. The one thing I would add is that I think you need to keep the end goal in mind, right? You need to have a vision and an understanding for the potential, right? Like you have to have a desire to get out of yourself your fullest potential. And in order to do that, to get your fullest potential out, you have to embrace struggle. You have to, for example, like I've noticed, because you brought up the business stuff, right? And so, having dabbled in that myself, what I've recognized is that in order for the business to move forward, I have to deal with the only thing that's holding the business back is me. And so therefore, I have to encounter, or I have to deal with the things that like my greatest weaknesses or whatever weakness it is, like, and it's like something that's deep. And what I'm recognizing too is this is just as true for our players when they're out on the field. And what's great, and I was thinking about it last night, is guess what? The game of baseball, really, in the grand scheme of things, whatever game it is you're playing, it's just a game, and it really doesn't matter. Facts. But what does matter and what makes the game so beautiful and amazing and awesome is that it's a game, right? Games are designed to put you in scenarios that there's really the consequences aren't that dire or drastic or whatever, right? Instead, it's to prepare you for those other things, right? It's like a scrimmage, basically. Games are like scrimmages, right? If you're in war or whatever, it's training for the real thing, and it pulls out those things that. This is where, like, for example, Chad, I know Robert is. Jordan Peterson guy, right? Like these are things that I think Jordan Peterson is like speaking to a lot of people, especially a lot of young men. But I even think to women, so because these lessons are applicable to, men and women. And it forces us to actually, if we want to do really well, it forces us to confront the things that are deficient within ourselves. And in order to get to that next level, we have to face those things. And there is nobody in the world right now, generally speaking, I want to say, like society, I'm talking not individual people, but like society is telling us and pushing us towards comfort and giving us all these ways to avoid confronting these hard things about ourselves. Right. And a lot of it too, I think, comes back to like, it's a focus on self, like being in a team sport, or even if it's like an individual sport, like gymnastics, tennis or whatever, ultimately the game itself, you have to be less selfish because you have to conform to what the game is asking of you, not what you want to have happen in the game, but what the game is asking of you to do. And so you actually have to die to self a little bit. You have to, which is odd to say because so many really good athletes have a ton of ego, but you have to rein back the ego a little bit. You have to be a little bit more humble, confront those things within yourself in order that you can actually be successful in that situation, or whatever game it is that you're playing. And so that's where I find it to be, the game becomes bigger than itself. When you can understand like the things that you will learn here and the things that you'll get better at will transfer. Like this is where, like, I think back to Inning by Inning and Augie Garrido. And he says to get to a place where like nobody can take anything away from you, right? Like this is, to me, that's the thing, that the things that you learn about yourself and the interpersonal, but it's like the personal skills that you develop, like from sports. And if you can figure out how to take that and apply that to the rest of your life, like nobody will ever be able to take those things away from you. And I think that's what like Augie Guerrero was talking about there, and why like he understood the game. Because this is, to me, the other point is you need to keep the big picture in mind. Augie was able to pull himself outside of the game and figure out, like, kind of like Gary Vee. He was able to pull himself out far enough, like he talks about dirt and clouds. He was able to change his perspective and get into the clouds and see the bigger picture, and understand, or at least to me, like once you can get this perspective and see the bigger picture, it makes everything else easier. Or it helps you navigate better, right? Like it talks about, like you Chad, you talked about the map, right? Like when you're navigating through, if you can get to a higher perspective or elevation, like you can begin to see, okay, this is how I have to navigate and traverse through this. And you're able to, if you can, right? Like the hard thing for a lot of people is not knowing when the end is going to be. But if you can see the end or where you're trying to go, then I also think of Lord of the Rings when Gandalf is in the mines of Moria. It talked about, he had this line where he didn't necessarily know exactly where he wanted to go, but he knew which direction he wanted to go, navigating through it. And so that helped inform him to get through the mines of Moria and to lead the Fellowship out. And so in the same way, I think like for all of us, we need to have, the idea and the concept of like a North Star. And regardless of where you're at, if you can orient yourself towards your goal, you will be able to find your way home. And this goes back to this idea of being dexterous, right? And highly adaptable. It puts you in a situation, no matter what situation you're in, you're able to find your way through it because you have that North Star, that, you keep the bigger picture in mind, the end goal in mind.
Do you think that, to the point of the map and the end, do you think players aren't aware? They're not connected necessarily that there is an end. Like, this is going to end for you. It ends for everyone. And they don't have, I know that's true of my kids. I'm spending a lot of times around 9 to 12-year-olds in the youth academy just because that's where my kids land. And so I try to spend a lot of time with them and their players, and the rising tide lifts all boats. So I'm trying to make the players around my children better so that it makes my children better. They certainly don't have the perspective that there is an end. Like, there's an end to this. You coach in college, and some college guys are starting to filter back into the facility with our high school guys after their seasons. Do you think they're connected too? There's an end to this, and the journey comes to an end.
Well, I think it comes back to this. Is
I know the high school guys.
Well, I mean, but this is to me the thing of there's a lot there, but the big thing I think it comes back to is attention. This is something Peterson talks about. This is something that's very ecological. Where is your attention? Where's your focus? A lot of you're right. The kids, they don't have the perspective. Their attention is not on that. And so to me, this goes back to, though, I think for a lot of young people, the issue is having, I think, inspiration or proper inspiration, right? It's because like we have all the, Instagram, Twitter. So it's whatever is eye catching, and it's all short-term stuff. And so what's interesting too, is that a lot of people today, young people, they want to become influencers. Like when you ask them, like, what do you want to be? An influencer. And it's like, that's
Great.
interesting. And and so I just think that even for me and like a lot of high school people, like we just don't know what's out there. Like our view of the world is only limited to the exposure that we've had to it. Like I just think about my 3-year-old son. Like there's so much that he doesn't pick up on and notice or know about the world, but he thinks he knows a lot. And so that's yes. And so that's the thing of, I think we have to try to broaden or help. I don't think we have to, but I think it's very beneficial to broaden our athletes like options, right? Like this is, increase their landscape of affordances and their perception of the possibilities within their world. And that's where I think inspiration becomes a big piece of helping them. For example, hey, you really like, having a deeper appreciation for those people that you want to be like and picking good role models. And then it's a question of like, hey, all right, you want to go to college or you want to become a pro athlete. Like, what is that? Telling that story. So one thing that my college coach, because my college coach for me, I think as hard as my experience was in college baseball, was the most informative for me and like helping me grow as a person, and to appreciate the deeper parts of the game. So one thing that he said was everybody sees the glory, but not everybody knows the story. Right. So everybody sees the big moment where Michael Jordan sinks the three in like a bit, like at the end of the game to win the game. But people don't know the story. But going back to it, I think I didn't have time to watch the video that you posted in here, and I kind of wanted to play it for people. In your blog post, but it was talking about Michael Jordan, right? Like people don't see all the shots that he took at the end of games to lose.
I have what maybe I don't. I've got a blog in my idea folder about setbacks, and I think that maybe I wrote it, maybe I didn't. I can't remember. My memory is going quickly as my kids drive me more crazy, but the opening statement that I want to make in the setback blog is, what if Michael Jordan makes the varsity team as a freshman? What if Tom Brady goes in the top 5 picks of the draft? What if Steph Curry gets accepted and goes to Virginia Tech? Do we know these guys? Like, are they who they are? I don't know that. I think a lot of times these setbacks, failures, quote fingers, in their journey, is Michael Jordan who Michael Jordan is if that guy in that moment lets him be on the varsity team as a freshman in high school. He breaks his own rule where he doesn't let freshmen be on the varsity team, or sophomore. It was freshman or sophomore, whatever. Michael Jordan's journey. Do we know, is Michael Jordan who he is? Is Tom Brady who he is if he's a top 5 draft pick? Or the fact that Michael Jordan didn't make that team, or Tom Brady went in the 6th round, or Virginia Tech told Steph Curry, we don't want you. That's a big chunk of who they became. A huge chunk of who they became. It's like in Endgame. It's like in Endgame when Doctor Strange goes back to and wants to get the time stone from the lady, and you create these alternative paths of the timeline of the universe. Like if you go back and you change that, and you could talk Michael Jordan's high school coach into putting him on the team. Does Charles Barkley become the greatest basketball player of all time and have 5 championships, or whoever played during that time, because there's no Michael Jordan?
No, that's a great point. And I mean, it brings up the impetus of, okay, let's talk about another athlete, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who, was a very lanky, skinny kid who was like, he's just a lanky, skinny kid. Like, he's not going to play very well. But then, obviously, he wins a championship with the Bucks, and then has a very well announced speech after losing to the Bulls in the first round in 5 games about, taking these failures and learning from them, and not treating them as failures, but learning outcomes. It creates the impetus. Are they really, like you said, Chad, are they really who they are? Are they really in the realm of, here I am as a person, like, oh, I am accepted into Virginia Tech with Curry, or Giannis, someone thinks Giannis can play. And then even in the baseball realm, recently Matt Mervis got called up by the Chicago Cubs. he played at Duke, but he never was really a prospect because he hit roughly, in the 280 range and was a first baseman that never really hit for power. But now he's completely overhauled his swing and everything like that, and how he's like approached things to be able to get called up to the major leagues. So it really is a good point to kind of think, how does setbacks affect an individual?
I'll give you this example too, a little closer to home. My son is in the third grade, plays basketball this winter, has a great basketball season, is a real big factor for his basketball team's success, scores a lot of points, runs the point guard, does the majority of yada, yada, yada. He's a third grader. Insignificant. We're undefeated in the championship game. We're down to the last 2 minutes. We were up at halftime to finish the season and the little tournament we had at the end as undefeated champions. We're up like 6 at halftime. We get down to 2 minutes. The other team comes back, takes the lead. My son has this. He's 9, so he has this problem with his overcoming his emotion, especially around losing. So team goes up. I mean, on the basketball floor, like I can see when it's happening, and it's happening. Throw the ball in. He turns it over. Throw the ball in again. He had about 3 possessions in a row. He turns the ball over. We lose the game. He's mad, emotional. Of course, in the moment, I don't say anything to him. But later in the day, I talked to him. And I said, look, man, let's put the cards on the table in a non-judgmental way. Okay? This is not me judging you. This is not me blaming you for what happened. This is just putting the cards on the table and having a conversation for what it is. In that last 2 minutes, you didn't play good. You had 3 turnovers. And he understands this. Like, you're responsible for a lot of the team's success, but in those last 2 minutes, if you play better, we probably win. And he understands that. I said, I want you to understand that these opportunities that where you turn the ball over in the last 2 minutes, and you have to stand there and watch the other team celebrate. If those things don't drive you to get up extra shots and put in extra time and do the extra things that you have to do so that those things don't happen again, then we missed an opportunity for growth through failing and losing. I said, because lose it like that, those moments for my son, they have to drive, like you look at Kobe. Kobe was like had this notorious work ethic, right? And I think you could Jordan losing to the Pistons. Jordan losing to the Pistons in like 89 or 90 kind of drives him to the point of like, I gotta get in the weight room. I gotta get stronger, because if I'm going to get knocked around, then I just got to put on weight, get stronger, yada, yada, yada. If those, for my son, if that last 2 minutes, turning the ball over 3 times and costing your team the opportunity for the undefeated season, this was a very real conversation that I had with him. And it was and I tried, and I told him up front, like, you have to understand where I'm coming from with this. This is not berating you. This is not anything. This is just for what it is. When you don't want to put in time, when no one's watching, when I say, hey, because we've got a basketball goal here in the facility. Let's get downstairs and let's get up 15 shots. And you come back and you got up 100 because you're willing to do the little bit extra because you remember what that moment felt like. Like, you remember what it felt like when you were standing there watching the other team's fans celebrate and yada, yada, yada because they beat you. If those things don't like sit on your shoulder and drive you, then we missed a great opportunity. You missed a great opportunity to find motivate. You talked about, Garrett, finding motivation or finding, something. I think those things, like those losses, those moments, that was a big thing for me in my journey. Came from a moment just like that, where my athletic career had gotten so high that not sure that I had that moment that sat right here that like drove me, or the doubt, the doubt, like I think Tom Brady like sat there, like people didn't think he was good enough, and like every morning he showed up early, and every extra rep he put in, and every understanding of defenses and playbooks and whatever. I think that sat like right there for however long he played, 20 years, 21 years. Like that sat there the whole time, and it all came from quote fingers, setbacks, failures, losses. So like you have to take these opportunities for what they are. So many people, like my son would have sat back in the bedroom after that game and just played his PlayStation 5, probably 2K at that time. He goes by the seasons, right? He plays the video game by the seasons. So he plays 2K during basketball season. He's in the show right now. He'll be in Madden in the fall when he gets to play. He doesn't sit back there and play all the time. But he would have sat back there and like not really understood, because I think adults don't have those conversations with their kids because they're scared to, or maybe they don't understand. Maybe they don't understand how to have the conversation with their kid of like, I'm not blamed. I mean, this is not, I'm telling you that the way that you play costs your team the game, but like, that's not a bad thing. Like, I'm not telling you that in any judgmental way. I'm just telling you that because that's the conversation that we're having with the cards on the table.
I think there's a lot of challenging things, especially like from a parenting standpoint, because I think a lot of us don't know how to talk to our children, because I'm learning this right as a parent, where I'm just like, I don't have the words right now. Like, I'm just not capable. I know how I should, like, like in a very conceptual, loose way, but I don't know exactly, or right now in the moment, I don't have the words that I need necessary. I don't have a deep enough understanding. And I think what's hard, and this is more a thought that I had, how like sometimes you'll have conversations with people in your head, in preparation
like every day
to talk to them.
I work by myself.
Yeah.
So the only people I talk to those days is myself.
But I had this one player in mind, or just like, because he similarly right now, he's got plenty of talent, but he's really struggling right now. And the other day we're hitting off the machine, and I don't know what the velo was. I don't know. It could have been 83. It could have been 92. I don't know. It's just, it was hard, and it had good carry. So he really struggles with that. And a lot of our guys do. And so anyways, he just, after 2 rounds, just took off his stuff, because he's just been having a hard year of just swinging and missing at the ball a lot. Probably more than he ever has. And so he just took off his stuff and quit halfway through the round. And
yeah,
there have been some other things too, where he just, this is hard for like people today, and like things are changing, right? Like you can't just ream out kids like you could before.
100%.
They just don't, they don't have the capacity to, one, handle it, because two, also parenting, people don't parent that way anymore either.
No,
one,
they don't.
And then two, it's not socially acceptable to do it. And three, you do it too much and CPS gets called and your kids get taken away. Right. So like there's a whole societal thing around this. And so not that it doesn't happen, and not that people don't have psychological issues because of, really hard and harsh, because I do think there's some better, like we've learned how to better communicate with each other, I think, in some ways. But at the same point, that's where I think the challenge is. We only know one of two things, either too hard or too soft, as far as like our, how we talk to, like I think going back to it, like even if I look into myself, there's this desire to have the right answer, the perfect answer, which is the exact same thing that our players are struggling with. Is they feel that they have to have right now the perfect answer. And I think that's something that we have to get back to, is like good enough. Like that's part of my problem with some of the stuff that I'm doing, is like I want it to be really high level right away, and it's just not how it works. It develops over time. You have iterations, and the more that you do it, the more that you're going to pick up things, but it's a slower process. And I think that's the element too, that people in this day and age of instant gratification, I'm even trying to figure out like, how do I help my child learn delayed gratification? You know, if I were to do the marshmallow experiment with him right now, he would take the marshmallow right now and not care about getting a second one later. Or if, you know, he had to wait, he would start picking and touching the thing, and eventually it'd be in his mouth, right? Like, he doesn't have, because we were doing it yesterday with the hamburger bun, you know, and he wanted to touch it, and then he was like putting his mouth on it, and eventually he would just been eating it. I was like, oh man, marshmallow experiment, he'd do really bad. And I'm like, how do I help him? You know, with this really important skill that I also really struggle with. And I think it's so many people today really struggle with that as well, and it's holding them back. And I didn't understand that I needed to have discipline like that when I was a kid. Like, that wasn't as emphasized, or I wasn't picking it up. And like, so much of, right, the video games, all this sort of stuff is designed to get you into a flow state, but in a overly manufactured way, right? That is not reality. You know, and so this is the thing that we're having to, I think, spend more time. And this is where I don't fault parents either, right? You got a job, you got like all this other sort of stuff that you're focused on. How much time do a lot of parents have to spend a lot of time thinking about this, educating themselves? I mean, I'm not, you know, I think you can always give excuses, but I also want to be realistic. You know, like my wife with what's going on with my other son who has eczema, like, she's still growing, you know, and listening to other things and taking in, but there's only so much, right? And there's only so much time for some people to spend the extra brain power that both of us spend devoted thinking about these things, learning about them, and having enough focus. You know, like, I think that's where I don't want to judge parents too hardly. But at the same point,
You know,
right,
I've
like,
found this.
the more we talk about it,
Yeah.
as coaches, right, the ones who are spending all this time, the more we talk about it, the more we share, the easier it will be for parents to come up with ways to better have these conversations with their children, right? Like, and the other thing that I wanted to say, based upon what you were saying, Chad, is that I think that is one way, right, of having that, seeing, like, because that's a common coach's trope, right, of like, you should, like, this loss, like, it should motivate you so much to work really hard, right? Like that, to perform better,
or can serve as, for sure.
Right. But I think then, like, for some kids, that just doesn't resonate.
I agree. I do agree with that.
And so I think we have to provide them other avenues, because I even know for myself, like, going back to what you were talking about before about like the younger kids and like things that they learn like through school and like that getting ingrained through school. What I'm learning through some of the child psychology stuff is that a lot of how a kid looks at life and like their kind of like core beliefs or like core ways of navigating through the world is kind of set by 7. So like, if you were to look back at yourself and like some of the hard lessons that you learned that like kind of set how you view life, particularly like look at life and then navigate through life, a lot of that were things that you either learned or decisions that you made on how to approach life by the time you were 7. And I noticed that a lot for myself in terms of like, when I was younger, there's this like learning about like people who had been dropped, like shipwrecked in the ocean and swam or like treaded water long enough to be rescued or like all the way back to the shore. I was just like, the amount of the sheer willpower that somebody needs to be able to do that and not know, right? Like not know when you're going to get rescued or when you're going to find land or that you're even going in the right direction. And so like as a young kid, like I decided like, I don't know if I could do that. Even just like too, some other things of like how many people in life get just so set on a thing that they won't let it go to the detriment of themselves. And I was like, I won't do that. And I think that that hurt my ability to struggle because I was just like, I'm going to go the path because I was like, I'm all about fun. This is my son is the exact same way. I'm all about fun. So I want to do something that maximizes fun and that minimizes risk and danger. And that cuts out struggle, and like those two things. And I think for a lot of kids, like some of the feeling that like I get from them is that they just get overwhelmed with the situation, not knowing how to have success, through that situation and work through that struggle to find success. Or two, they feel like it will never end. And it's, kind of like that I'm going to have to swim forever. And I don't know that I can do that type of a thing. And so that's where it's like trying to give them, because it goes back to this thing of like quitting. Like that's the thing is like, that's where true failure is when you quit. Like it's set in stone, like where you're at right there. Like if you quit here, then you've failed. Like that was the thing that I talked to Mike Rathwell and when I was talking to him about business stuff and he's like, like, and even like a business being in a hard position financially, all that sort of stuff. He's like, honestly, a business only fails when the people who are running the business decide to quit. That's the only time it fails. And that really stuck with me from a business standpoint, but also like thinking and taking that principle and just applying it to like what I'm seeing with my players a lot of them just giving up and quitting just quitting is the best way that I can describe it. And what I've said to our players is like, look, when you give up on whatever it is that we're doing, this activity or drill, I don't like anyways, this activity, this practice activity, you quit in the game or like check out in the game, all this sort of stuff. One, you're not only just giving up on yourself, you're giving up on the rest of us too. Like your decision to quit just doesn't hurt you, it hurts us. But I also wanted to say to them, it also really, it also hurts you. And that's where I think helping them understand like, hey, like this is keeping you from your goals. And I think that's where there's a question too, going back to it of like, how do we help them keep that desire? Or maybe it is just giving them that choice. I don't know, of like, I don't know how to describe it, of like, maybe I think this from like a parenting standpoint, I need to, for my children, like tell them like, hey, this is my desire for you, is that I want you to be able to handle anything that life throws at you. Like that's like what I'm trying to do as a parent is to get you to a place where whatever situation you're in, that you're going to be able to navigate through it. And when you start to build these things into kids and like, tell them your goals for them, I think they buy in too, as far as like being able to handle more of what you throw at them in terms of, because I keep thinking about like oftentimes the way that we phrase it to them first, I don't think it's bad to do this second, is, hey, you needed to figure out, whether you want to do this or not, type of a thing. We leave it up to them. Like, do you want it bad enough? And if you don't want it bad enough, then maybe you should just quit. And then I think a lot of people do end up quitting. And I think that's unfortunate because they didn't know to hold themselves to a higher standard first. Like, I think a lot of times we have to, kind of like the military. Do we talk about that in the past of how the military found out that in World War II, the majority of only 25% of guys, I think, who had a rifle shot their rifle and only like 1 or 2% of them actually shot at somebody to actually try to kill them. So, but no, I mean, but like, so the military had to design training to actually figure out how to train people to actually use their weapon in combat.
Shoot at someone.
Yeah.
Have you
so
read,
like actually combat effective?
To these points, have you read either of Mark Manson's books, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F and Everything is F'd by Mark Manson? Have you read either one of those?
I've read and listened to both.
I've looked into some of his.
I think it should be required reading. I actually, that The Subtle Art I give to all of the seniors when they, if we have seniors and I have to get them a graduation gift, I give them that book. Because a lot of the message in that book is like, I think one of the key messages of that book is like, you are what you struggle for. Those are that was to the point of what you were making is, you are and you become what you struggle. Not, the message that we give to people is follow your passion and do what you love and yada, yada, yada. But in reality, you become what you're willing to struggle for and do. I think Cal Newport in Be So Good That They Can't Ignore You. I think that's kind of the message is like, follow your talent and develop a passion for it. Don't just, if Steve Jobs had followed his passion, I think I've heard somebody say that. It's like, what he would have been like, I don't know, a weed grower or something else. But he followed his talent and struggled. I'm sure creating the first Apple computer was not easy at all. And I'm sure it endured several setbacks in the beginning, but you just kind of follow what you're good at. And then you build this ability to struggle, alongside, I guess, your talent and abilities. And you end up at a place further than most people, because again, in life, most people take the safe success. That's what a job is. That's what and a job as an adult is. Not knocking anything that is a job, but like creating your own pathway is like really freaking hard. It's really hard. And it certainly doesn't, for at least for me, in the journey of that I've been on, it hasn't gotten easier. I think people think at a certain point it's going to get easier. It's like, it's not going to get easier. I
wonder if you ask Kyle and Mike Rathwell,
for sure,
if they would say something similar, right?
Yeah.
As their business scaled.
It's like, as I'm talking about this, and how old are your children?
I got a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old.
So you have struggles now, right?
Oh yeah.
You have struggle. And you think, oh man, when they're just like 7 or 8, we won't have to deal with this anymore. And you're right. But guess what? There's something else. And guess what? My daughter's 11 now. Guess what? There's something else. We don't have the same struggles as we had when she was 2, but it's like, there's always something else. Rathwell and Kyle would probably say the same thing about Driveline. What we struggled at in the beginning is not what we struggle at now, but we're still struggling. But again, it goes back to like, Kyle probably likes chess better, but it's like his talent and ability lies in this. And so I struggle for this. I can't just do what I like, which is playing chess all the time or whatever.
There are a couple of things there, but I know, Robert, you got to get going here soon. So I want to hear, like, is there anything that you want to land the plane on before you have to take off?
Let's talk about this. So with what Chad mentioned, and I think it ties 2 and 2 together with, like, doing your kind of like an entrepreneurial type thing versus, getting a job. The school system is frankly just based on creating factory workers. That's how it was
100%.
principled on.
Yep.
That's how it's
Yep.
principled on. So you go, at the
They
early
were trying to
stages.
condition people during the industrial era.
Yes. So you go in at, with the school system, you go in at 7 a.m., you're done at 3 p.m., and that's similar to like a first shift factory worker. So what that creates is just, it feeds into the corporate world. So really what school is trying to get you to is go right into the corporate world, and it's just cyclical. Then when you're in the corporate world, they say, hey, going to school is important, doing this, doing that. When really you're not really being taught how to learn. You're just being taught how to be obedient. And so,
Or conditioned.
So that's where, there are going to be struggles when you don't follow that path, because it's not talked about, and two, in a lot of cases, it's frowned upon. I mean, think about it this way. Now, I know I'm going to a cartoony type movie, but, the Super Mario Brothers movie that recently came out, when Mario and Luigi saying, hey, we're going to start our own plumbing company, his dad didn't like it, because he's like, why would you leave a comfortable job to go, pursue this unknown? And, it ended up working out in the end. But, there's just this ideology behind, hey, you have to go this, this path. You have to live in this one or two paths. And I think that just breeds too much complacency, one, and then two, does not create a lot of exploration, which is, a big topic of this podcast.
I think some of it too comes back to, how do we, I guess, live a fulfilled life, in some ways, right? Like, and what does that look like? Because I think not everybody, because, right, I think going back to the failure piece and why people avoid failure is because they have some sort of, right, when they hear these stories, right, of like, because a lot of movies are actually about striking out on your own and, taking the different path or the road less traveled. But I think there can be some discontent if you are going the normal path. And I'm not saying that discontent is always a bad thing, but sometimes when it becomes to the point where you start to despair and to give up, I think that's where I'm more trying to say, is that it's not always about going the different path and off on your own necessarily, but it is trying to discover how to become the best version of you. And I think that, to me, transcends, right? If you find for yourself, you know what, I can't do the entrepreneurial thing. Like, I just don't have the skill for it. I don't have the skill to strike it out on my own to go this different direction. Well, then it comes back to like, okay, what intention or what focus, going back to like, can cover, because this is where, going back to my favorite topic, ecological dynamics, like what drew me to it is that it's so dynamic in the sense that it puts you in a place where, right, like, this goes back to the topic too of like learning through failure. It puts you in a no lose situation, right? Where no matter what, you can find a way to win. And that, to me, or like, and winning, I think, is about achieving a goal, right? This is what you put in your article, Chad. And so it's redefining what success is. And so, to me, like, what is the broadest goal that can cover the most, or what is the goal that can cover the most different situations? And to me, it is reaching your fullest potential. Putting yourself to get as close to becoming, the best version of yourself. And that I think covers, the whole gamut.
Yep. The one thing that I would add, and I guess, Robert, we can end this thing, is like, don't limit, like, this can be said of baseball players. Baseball players put limitations on what they think the best version of themselves looks like. And so they think, well, I can't do that. And it's like, you don't know that. Obviously you're not gonna dunk a basketball, and you're not gonna be a 4.4 40 runner or whatever, but we don't know what the limitations are of human beings by striking the balance, ecological perspective of, the organism, the task, and the environment, and what creating these things can become. Did you not become what you wanted to become because you didn't have the ability, or did you not strike the right balance between the task, the environment, and the challenge of overcoming it? Because there are a lot of people, I say this to our players, our older players a lot, is there's probably somebody like you that has made it, but you're limiting yourself in the thinking that you have for no reason. Like, there's somebody exactly like you that's probably made it, and you didn't, because fill in the end of that. So that's, I guess, my last point.
Oh, we can keep going since Robert jumped out. So if you want, we also have a good landing point. I mean, there's just so much to cover on this. Like, I mean,
there is.
There's just
I don't know that
I've been.
I don't know if you can ever talk players into perspective and growth mindset. This goes back to your religion piece too. What people find peace in, what people find comfort in, what people connect to a higher being, a higher value. It's like that aerial view. I think that's where religion helps people. Is I think it helps them
kind of like
to that.
Well, I mean, that's something that, like, to just go the Jordan Peterson route, because I think he's a good bridge, is that
Right.
The more, what's been interesting, huh?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I missed. Oh, it's a good bridge in the sense that, like, he's understanding, and there's these patterns. Jonathan Peugeot talks about this, right? Like, there's these patterns to how the world works and operates. And this is something that Jordan Peterson is finding. And, like, there's these threads that kind of bind us all together, right? If you look at movies, right, there's this sort of this pattern. And as you break this pattern, the movie doesn't really work. Meaning, because I remember watching one of the, what is it? The Marvel movies. I'm forgetting what it's called when they're all together.
The Avengers.
I want to say that the Justice League, not the Avengers, because the Avengers is the four. I'm talking like Captain America, Iron Man,
Civil War.
When they're, I don't know, Civil War. Okay, so kind of like, I think it was even that one. Like, the movie starts out with them just like absolutely just demolishing everybody. Like, basically you had put in like the cheat mode, like the God mode, and like they're just, nothing touched them. They just absolutely ripped through everything. And I'm just like, if this was the whole movie, this would be boring. This would be boring.
Right.
And if there wasn't an actual conflict or struggle, the conflict and the struggle is what makes it interesting. And people who have like done film analysis have talked about, like, for example, like Ant-Man, and different, like, showing like this scene where you acquire a new skill and it happened too fast. Like the way that they shot it happened too fast, and it didn't give this feel of like he really actually gained something. Whereas they contrasted like the Dark Knight movie, and how, like, after he gets defeated by Bane, like the whole montage of how he worked and gotten himself back and ready to go fight Bane and then overcome him, like, that struggle, like this is something that's innate within us, right? Of like understanding that. And so, I mean, I don't want to get into a sermon, so I'm not. So I'm just going to use those examples of like these are patterns of reality, and this is the thing of like these things are just, we're trying to connect to reality. This is the thing of like, at least for me, like a lot of this has been very informative. It's very cool to see all these things connect, like EcoD to Eastern Orthodoxy and like religion, and like to see the connections. Like Jordan Peterson has kind of been a person that's like kind of shown how like all these things kind of connect and are interrelated, and it kind of comes back to like why there's a reason why I guess I had said that, probably should cut this part out, but like there's a reason why I had said like, all right, I landed on to become the best version of yourself, because there are, at least within my belief system, in order to become the best version of yourself is to become, or to be the, like, to connect to your creator, to be like your creator, right? And so like it doesn't, like, if you follow, there's this belief, right, of like, if you search for truth, like everybody ends up in the same spot in a certain sense. And then the same thing too, like if you pick the right intention, right? If we're going back to like developing players, if you pick a good intention and you keep refining your intention, it will open up all these different affordances to you and allow you to be super dexterous and to navigate through reality. And you know, this is just my personal opinion. Like the biggest thing that holds us back from being connected with reality and to truth is ourselves, right? Like you see it all the time with different people when it comes to like baseball, right? Like there's science, there's logic, and just to show that their position is actually illogical, but they are more set on something else, right? There's something that's preventing them from seeing those things, right? Like the whole, what did I, repeatable mechanics is a myth that just won't die.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Right. Like there are just things that like are going to prevent people from seeing it. I mean, we don't need to talk about like what happened in 2020, but like there are lots of things that like for a lot of people, they just even today won't see some of the things that actually went on there. Right. And so like, that's where I think if you're honestly searching for truth and that matters to you above all else, like it's all about, what I'm learning is all about your intention. This is why we care so much about like, hey, what's your intention in this like when you're interacting with somebody else, right? If you're going to discipline your kid, you're going to look first to give a good discipline. You're going to look first at what was their intention there, and how you're going to instruct or whatever. So there's my mini rant.
No, you're good. You're good. No, you're right. I mean, to the point of struggle and losing, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to connect to, and what are you willing to do?
Yeah. I mean, because but you said something about like struggle. What you struggle for is who you kind of be, like it changes you. What was it? What is it that you said that I thought was really good? It was, struggle, you become what you struggle for, or
yeah. That's in the that's Mark Manson. I
mean, I think that's
like kids. It's why kids are so hard. That's why being
mm-hmm.
I'm not going to use the word good because that's a bad word to describe it. Things aren't good or bad. They just are what they are. Right. But that's why being a parent is so difficult, is because it's this constant struggle. It like never lets up, because you're trying to feel all these needs for your kids, and you're trying to be all these things. And it's hard. It's harder than anything that people say that, but it's like, if you're trying to be good, what's a better word? Fulfilling? Like, what's a better word? Good's a bad word. Like good implies that I'm trying to maybe be better than someone, and I'm not. I'm not trying to be better than anyone. I'm just trying to do the job as best I can do it. And kids is like,
well,
it's like the epitome of struggle.
No, but I mean, I think you can, right? Like we can say things are objectively good and bad. I mean, I think you can,
For sure.
and some things can be better than others. Like, it depends on what we're trying to do here, right? Like it comes back to what's the goal. And I think, you're trying to be a good parent, right? Like that's the goal, but you have to define what good is. So for example, like what does it
Right.
mean to be a good parent? So my definition is to like make my kid or facilitate my kid or allow my or what's the word? I'm trying to put this in ecological terms, right? Because I'm not trying to make my kid a certain thing, right? I'm trying to set the conditions by which he can become or they can become they can be able to handle all the hardships and the unknowns of life. Because going back to being able to embrace struggle, you also part of it, especially for modern people, I think, and even because there are kids who, right, suffering and struggle is just part of life, and there are a lot of things out there that are trying to pull that, like, tell you that, like, hey, we'll make all this go away, and
I think the internet gives you the
so
illusion
there's
that it's going to go away. Instagram gives you the
right,
illusion that it's going to go away.
but I think because there's a difference, right, between like what's truly inspiring, like to the core, and what is just interesting and alluring. And I think that's where, because I've been thinking about it too. Like one of my favorite videos, maybe we'll pull it up, of Bruce Lee is, and I don't remember if I played this one for you. It's about like in order to, um, well, maybe I'll see if I can pull it. But it's where he's interacting with a student, and he says, "Kick me," and then he kicks him, and he's like, "What was that?" We need emotional content. And that whole piece there is like a lot of, how we've done a lot of our training. We've been so focused on mechanics and all this sort of stuff and the X's and O's because we're trying to cut out, like, we're trying to be robots, meaning regardless of how we feel, we're still going to perform. And it doesn't matter. Like, I don't have to have my inner self like put together. I just go out there and I execute every single time.
Right.
And what he's saying is like, no, the emotional content is what drives, what imbues the movement. Right. And this, to me, it's just very ecological. And to me, this is where the heart element of like, this is deeper, right? Like we have to get to the deeper part of it. And then everything else kind of, this is where I guess for me, it's hard because I want to say that everything flows from that, but I'm not sure yet that I want to go that far. But I know that from an ecological perspective, the heart and the movement are tied together, right? Like it's part of your being. And this is where to me it's I think it's hard for a lot of people because of our schooling. Like we have a Western mind. Like we're very much focused on rational and mechanical and all this sort of stuff. And to think in more holistic terms is not something that we have been trained on. To push into emotion a little bit has been kind of trained, but not, I don't think in a healthy way, like is in our society necessarily, because we've lost the ability to have hard conversations in a civil way and to like challenge one another. Like, and so where I'm going with this too is that one concept that I really was thinking about was like, well, how do I get the most out of a person to get them to struggle with uncertainty? Especially because that's what life is, and that's what the game of baseball and other sports do, is they give you a level of uncertainty. And part of what came up in some of the ecological talks that Keith Davids gave was having safe uncertainty. So to create a situation, right? Like as a parent, as a coach and team, is I want to create safe uncertainty. So I need to create an environment where you feel safe to be able to handle the stress of uncertainty. And that, I think nobody is talking about. How do we develop a relationship where, right, like this is people who are really good at relationships is like, I make you feel safe so that I can ask you to do something hard and challenging where you feel uncomfortable. but you feel safe enough to go out and take this risk because of our relationship, right? Or because I have a safety net, right? Like family, whatever these things are, right? And like that to me is where like baseball can be a really cool thing, is because of that team element of like, okay, everybody, not just because we oftentimes we talk about it in terms of players, right? And having trust and team chemistry, but that needs to also be the coaching staff has to be a part of that. And so that's to me where I'm trying to learn or try to figure out like how do we develop and facilitate that more, because then guys will take greater risks. Guys will be able to handle the stress of the challenge because, right, like we talk about the CNS, but the CNS is also influenced by the emotional and cognitive stress and the cognitive load that the system feels. And so we're like back to like what we were kind of talking about before of the more you do hard things and the more you stay in it, you know, obviously you need to take some time off to recover, like have a deload. But if you take a deload for too long, you detrain, right? And the same thing I think is true for like our ability for cognitive stress and all these different things. Cause I came to this realization when everybody was talking about like reducing stress. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm always stressed out. So I need to be less stressed. And what I came to is like, you'll never get stressed. Like you were talking about struggle. You'll never get stress out of your life. There'll always be some form of stress, and stress is actually good, right? Because we know this from lifting, right? In order to get stronger, you have to stress the system. But the more you stress the system, the more your system adapts to that stress, the more stress you can handle, right? This is where like, I think the difference between like you and me, Chad, is you can handle more stress than I can. That's why you're a good entrepreneur. You can handle a greater workload. And whereas like for myself and maybe other people in my generation, we can't handle that same stress. Like the amount of work and effort that we put in, like we can't handle that cognitive load, that stress, the anxiety. We don't know how to handle that and manage it, right? Like in the same way that like some kids don't know how to lift 300 pounds, right? But over time, you can learn how to do this. You learn strategies, ways of interacting with the world to be able to handle that. And that's the whole thing of like what we're talking about today of like embracing the struggle, embracing the failures, the setbacks as actually this is where the growth is, right? Like if you think about it, like how is it that we grow muscles? You create micro traumas, right? You create small tears in the muscle, and the body comes and it repairs it, and you get stronger for next time. And it's the same thing, right? Like of failures. Failures are like little micro traumas, and micro traumas aren't bad, but we have this idea that trauma is bad. Obviously, like in some sense it is, but in another sense it's not. We need these small doses of these things. So
for sure.
I don't know if that's sparked anything for you.
No, that could be said for a lot of things though. Just the world that we.
Well, that's where I find that. I was just going to say that's where I find this like this becomes so much more intriguing, like because I don't know, like you said before, baseball ends, right? And then you're like, well, if it ends, like I don't know, you kind of become like, in some ways, as you get closer to the end, like I've seen this, right, where you feel like the score now is so lopsided that you just kind of give up, and it's like, no, don't give up. Like that's where I've seen people quit too early, you know, like work it all the way through the end, because there's still something that you can gain out of it, even if you don't win this game, this season, whatever. Like there's so much, and that's where to me it becomes invigorating, is that now it has meaning, right? And we can get into that whole thing of like what that, because I think that's an important piece of this, is like meaning. And this is why Vervaeke and the meaning, awakening from the meaning crisis, all this sort of stuff, we need to in some ways rediscover that, and kids need to rediscover that, because we don't always recognize what we're swimming in, you know, and I didn't, you know, and because so many people struggle with like anxiety, depression, and like the sport feeds that, which is kind of like Bosch, right? You know, or whatever, right? Feed the dysfunction or whatever, which can be a good thing. But if you don't know what you're doing, that actually can be a very bad thing, right? And so this is where, like, I think the role of a coach, the role of a parent is super important, because we can help mitigate those, like, from things getting out of control, right? Inflammation is a good thing. It promotes the healing process, but when it goes way out of control, like, we have problems. Like, that's not good. And so, I don't know. That's to me where I want to advocate, like, our role is important. It has meaning. It has value, and that's where the fun comes in. Like, I think going back to what you're talking about, like, this is where discovering the passion, like, to me, like, that's where it's, I don't know. But I think, yeah. So anyways, want to hear if you have any thoughts.
No, I don't. I'm sitting here thinking about my baseball career as a player came to an end. What I would argue as sooner than it should have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it came to an end sooner than it should have because I was connected to the wrong idea and outcome for what I was pursuing. So I was impatient, like I didn't have patience, was willing to struggle, but again, connected to the wrong outcome. So I kept spinning my wheels, and obviously it ended before it should have. But I think in the journey that I've been on as an entrepreneur, so to speak, it's lasted as long, it lasts as long as it has, because I think I've connected to the right thing. And so the failure, the struggle, the shortcoming have all built to, the correct outcome, which has always been like, I want to help players, from the first day that I coached, like, the only intention was like, I just want to help players get better. Really, we're just going to go into the direction that feeds that. I did love the public school structure because I had to answer to someone who did share that common goal. And so I've been happy with what I've been able to do I'm in my 12th year of this world. It's just because we can always go towards that. We don't have to answer to whoever, and whatever struggles we face, we can align with the goal of helping the player become better, regardless of what anybody thinks, or what direction we should go, or what we should do, or how we should talk to people. Aligning to the right goal, or the right outcome, or the right vision, I think has helped that. I think my shortcomings as a player were just aligned in impatience, but you have to think back during that time, because it's getting to be a long time ago. We just lacked information that we have now, for what you need for the journey to the big leagues, right? I wanted to be a big leaguer, and so we didn't have enough information to connect to, like, what do you exactly have to do to become a big leaguer. And so I think the search for information in your journey, in whatever you're doing, but then aligning to the correct vision or outcome is important, because that makes the struggle worth it, right? That makes the losses worth it. Like, that makes everything worth it. So
it gives meaning to it. And I think, to what you were talking about, like, the one way that I've kind of come to even look at some of my own stuff is, like, what you're talking about, like, if it weren't for the experience that you had through baseball, you wouldn't become the coach, right? And your career ending early. You wouldn't become the coach that you are today. You wouldn't have become the entrepreneur. You wouldn't have become the person you are today without that thing. And you are better for it. Like, and that's the thing of, like, people trying to understand, like, I what's a like, there's some saying, I don't know what it, like, that most people, I'm trying to think of the secular version of it, but, like, everything happens for a reason. There it is. Right. Like, and that it in that, like, we can grow through these things. And so, for me, like, my faith informs this of, like, everything happens in my life for my salvation. for the best outcome, right? And so understanding, like when you understand like, hey, life is working such that you like the whole thing is designed to actually to have the best outcome for you. And like when you can get into that, like it can be really hard, because some terrible things happen to people. But like
sure.
There, I'd have to get into way too much stuff that I don't want to get into right now. It's not the right platform right now. But anyways, my point simply is that when you can get to that place, because you're going to be able to handle way more, right? Like it's oftentimes, right, if you shift your mindset and your perspective on how to interact with something, all of a sudden your ability to handle things just goes way up. Like your tank gets bigger. And I think that's where I'm starting to get to this place of, even though EcoD is like really awesome and great, and like the activities, I'm starting to like think more about the mental side, but not in a decontextualized manner. Cause I think that's my criticism of like the sports psychologist and like the mental side of the game is it's oftentimes very decontextualized. You're in an office talking, like I know, what was, Ken Revisa, right? I think in some of his books that I was reading, right? They're out on the field doing stuff. And that's how it should work. You can't be sitting in an off, like you can, but at the end of the day, to get the most out of it, you can't be sitting in the office. You got to be out on the field. Like it needs to be more integrated, like into a practice session. Like it needs to, that's where the real work happens. So, I'm kind of at this place of having done this enough of, I think this is good. We're at a place where we can kind of land the plane. Where would you like to land the plane?
So I think a couple of things in the struggle of losing, and these are things that I try to tell my kids like every day. Mm-hmm. I at the end of the day, I always ask my kids, "Did you do anything awesome today?" And they think what I am talking about is like making threes or hitting homers or whatever. We go round and round about what is awesome. And I always, when they get out of the car in the morning, I tell them to do awesome things. And what I mean by that is be somebody that is helpful. Be intentionally helpful today. Be intentionally kind to someone today. Have a sense of humor about things in yourself. Those are the things that, and here's a Jordan Peterson. I'll add this one. This is one thing that I try to drive home with my kids in the journey of trying to do awesome things. Is I think the chapter that Jordan Peterson writes about your kids is really important because he talks about being likable to adults. Like kids have to try to be likable to adults because adults have perspectives and ideas that you might need for good or bad. And if they don't like you, they're not going to share them with you. So try to be intentionally likable to the adults also, because for good, for better, for worse, they'll share information with you. In the winning and losing, I think that connecting to those ideas of being awesome, being intentionally helpful to someone. I wrote that about getting out of a slump. If you want to get out of a slump, just be intentionally a better teammate. Take the focus off of yourself and go out of your way to recognize the success of others, to be the guy that brings the energy and everything. You'll find your way out of it. But what's going to consume you is your own selfish being and your own selfish idea. All of these things, if you connect to these things that I tell my kids to do, awesome things, if you connect to those things, the winning, the losing, the struggle, the pursuit, the journey will become more enjoyable. I tell them these things because these are not things that I connected to as a young person. I thought my journey was all about me and my pursuit of doing what it takes, and doing what it takes is super important. But the things that I lacked are the things that I try to do. Did you do anything awesome today? I use my quote fingers. That's what I try to connect my kids to, because I think that's what's going to help people get through the inevitable losing, the inevitable, are you intentionally kind to other people? Are you intentionally helpful? Do you have can you laugh at yourself? those things. I think those things are important to my kids because
I
I'm
want to
not
touch on that.
make any bones about that things are going to be hard for you.
I want to touch on that last point because what I came to realize when I was playing college baseball was I was willing to do more than I would have on my own being a part of the team than if it was just me by myself. Like I wouldn't have done all the things that I did, lifting, etc., whatever, if it was just for me. Because I didn't want to lift, I didn't want to do these things because of because I was a part of a team and where the team was going and what the team was about. I wanted to be a part of that and I wanted to contribute to that. So therefore, I had to do things that I didn't want to do. And that that to me is being less selfish, less focused on self. And for me, it was the greatest thing of like getting to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And I think that's really hard to, it's not easy to find places where you get to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And that's too where, like, you know, I think I find the sport hard in some sense because it is so egocentric, meaning focused on self. Right. And but at the same point, it's there, the opportunities, the affordances for selflessness. And then because when you are doing things for something bigger than yourself, greater than yourself, you have to become a better version of yourself. Right. Like you have to pull out the best of you. And that's like, this is the thing, right? Of like being a parent, right? Like you're in part of a family, like that, all of a sudden you're now a part of something bigger than yourself. Right. And in order to do it at a high level, to reach your goal, you have to be less focused on yourself and more focused on others in order to do that. And like, I think that's where, you know, to your last point, like, I don't know, like there's something about that. Like it's really hard, but at the same point, it's also really fulfilling. If you are in the right context, right? Like I want to put those qualifiers because there are certain presuppositions that need to be met in order for you to have it be a safe place, a safe place for you to, you know, do that. Cause you know, if the person's just always taking, like, then you know what, you do at some point have to consider yourself and maybe adjust your situation. But at the same point, like that's being in a place where, to your point, if you want to get more out of yourself, sometimes you actually have to get out of yourself and focus on others.
For sure.
Well, even too, like just a different thought, right? External focus of attention, right? Like we know for sports, right? If you want to have better outcomes and better performance, external focus of attention. I don't know. Interesting thought. All right. Usual things. Unless you have anything you want to add on that, I'll just land the plane, I guess.
Yeah.
Usual things. Where can people find you? What are you up to these days? How can people connect with you?
I find I'm pretty active on all social medias, just trying to present more information in a broader scope of topics than maybe I have in the past. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, just look my name up. You'll find me, Chad Longworth. My website, chadlongworth.com. Very easy to find me. Hopefully the work that I provide is interesting and helpful to you on your journey. I just sharing my ideas going on now and over, I guess my professional baseball career started in 2002. So over a 20-year journey of figuring this world out. So continuing to share and grow, hopefully.